Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Franklin Pierce, and the focus is back to New Hampshire. The year is 1842, and Jane Pierce, Franklin Pierce's wife, is thrilled because he is out of politics. He has just resigned his position as a United States Senator. The family is all together, and they're moving to Concord, to their new home that they called the Pierce Manse. Now, Jane Pierce was often ill, that continued at this point, and Franklin Pierce was often very different when he was around her, including abstinence. He would stop drinking. In fact, at this point, he joined the temperance movement, eventually becoming the chairman of the State Temperance Society. Also got back full-time with his law partner, Asa Fowler. By all accounts, Franklin Pierce was an exceptional attorney. In fact, sometimes people would travel for miles around to hear some of his more powerful oratory and some of his prominent cases. The Chief Justice of New Hampshire called Pierce a perfectly fearless man, so he is a perfectly fearless advocate. It is this courage which kindles his eloquence, inspires his conduct, and gives direction and firmness to his skill. Pierce also got high marks from his law clerks, and for whom he served as a very valuable mentor, including the likes of Sylvester, who said about Pierce that he was accustomed to discuss with us legal and other questions as though we were his equals, and contributed in many ways to make us feel at home. He gave his cases the most laborious and exhaustive preparation, leaving no details, however minute, unexplored. Unfortunately for the Pierces, happiness always seemed to be elusive. Something always came around the corner, and this time the latest tragedy was the loss of their son. Frank, 4 years old, died of typhus, November of 1843, the second child that they have lost. Both parents took this hard. Franklin Pierce turned to introspection on his own life choices, where Jane Pierce just had pure anguish. She said, "I hardly know how I go on from day to day without him." Franklin Pierce, no political office for an entire decade after leaving the Senate, but he remained very active in politics. He had the appointed position of being the head of the Democratic Party in the state of New Hampshire, which was a powerful position for which he was very well suited. He was a natural leader, gregarious, a good communicator. This gave him an opportunity to maintain contacts and relations with people from around the state. He also was prominent in stumping at the national level for James Polk, who was a compromise candidate coming out of the Democratic Convention, the first dark horse candidate in American history, won the presidency in 1844 with Franklin Pierce behind him. Pierce also sought to keep the locals in line. The example of John Hale. Now, John Hale was a college buddy of Franklin Pierce. They go way back. He's now a congressman, and he made a decision to go against his instructions and vote against the annexation of Texas, which again was a hot issue at the time. Now, Pierce was not happy with that, but it's what he did next that really got his ire, and that Hale put out a public letter criticizing the people who voted in favor of annexation. And this went too far as the state chairman, Franklin Pierce, was concerned, and he was bound to do something about it. He not only chastised Hale, he decided to make an example of him. He called a special convention of the Democrats to replace Hale, who had already been renominated for his congressional post. And sure enough, he ousted him, replaced his candidacy with a different Democrat. Didn't matter. Hale tried to meet with him, tried to tell him this was a vote of conscience. Franklin Pierce didn't want to hear it. He was unmoved. Hale was out. Hale became his most outspoken political enemy for the rest of his career. Well, one of the reasons that Hale voted against annexation of Texas was because of slavery. A lot of folks in the North thought that the grab for Texas was simply an opportunity to expand the South's so-called peculiar institution into this new area. He was against that. And more in the North were starting to feel the same way. No more expansion of slavery. Well, Franklin Pierce was very consistent on this, and he took the time to actually make yet another comment. He believed that the Constitution sanctioned slavery, and the Founding Fathers made this decision, and he was bound to stick with it. According to Pierce, he acknowledged that we deplore its existence and regard it as a great moral and social evil. But with this conviction, we do not deem ourselves more wise than Washington, Franklin, and their associates, and that patriotism, common honesty, and religious principle alike bind us to a sacred observance of the compact made by those wise men. That the policy to be pursued in reference to slavery rests with the states and territories within which it exists, and that angry external agitation, by exciting the prejudices of the slaveholding communities, while it may endanger the Union, tends rather to fasten than to destroy the bonds of the enslaved. Pierce thought all this agitation was not only counterproductive, but he implied un-American to try to rid the country of slavery, given its constitutional roots. He didn't change that perspective his entire career. Consistent with that view was the President of the United States, James Polk, and he was fond of Pierce and he wanted to bring him back to Washington. He had an opening in his cabinet, 1846, and he gave the opportunity for Pierce to come back as the Attorney General, and Pierce turned him down. Respectfully said no for a couple of reasons. The first was that the Attorney General was the lowest rung in the cabinet at the time. There was no Justice Department. It was a one-man shop. You were basically serving as the constitutional attorney of the president, and he wasn't that interested in that position. More importantly, his wife Jane didn't want him to go. She was strongly against him getting back into a political position, didn't want him away in Washington. That certainly weighed in on his decision. But the most important reason was he sensed that war was coming and he wanted to be in uniform and lead men in battle like his father did in the Revolutionary War. This conflict over Texas, the United States and Mexico that was brewing in the southern border, part of the president's vision of manifest destiny of it getting more land extending across the continent all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This vision was percolating. Franklin Pierce shared that vision, and if there was going to be a war to fight for it, he was bound and determined to be a part of it. Sure enough, war was declared in June of 1846, and it got off to a good start for the Americans. Brigadier General Zachary was in charge at the initial clash and had some successful victories in northern Mexico, just south of that new state of Texas. But the administration over time changed its strategy. So, you know what, we got to get to Mexico City to get the Mexicans to capitulate. That's how we're going to win this thing. And coming through the north, that was not the preferred route. Really, the way to go is east. Land in the Gulf of Mexico, in Veracruz, capture that city, head straight west from there to Mexico City and get capitulation. For this, he needed a whole bunch of more soldiers, new officers, and that's where Franklin Pierce comes into play. Congress passed the 10-regiment bill in February of 1847 to authorize these new troops. The United States at the time, and really in many decades in the whole founding era and through the 19th century, was against a standing army. They saw that from sort of the European model of tyrannical and despotism, and mostly stayed away from it. So they had to staff up pretty quickly with soldiers whenever they had a military conflict like this war with Mexico. And that's what happened. They passed this bill. They often turned to politicians to help lead men into battle, and that's where Franklin Pierce came into play. He signed on as a colonel. He was to recruit a regiment in New Hampshire that he would then lead in battle. His personal and political skills were perfect for this. He easily satisfied his quota in short order, and he served as a colonel in the United States Army for about 2 weeks, because then he was elevated to a one-star brigadier general. They realized that they needed more general officers to support this effort in the Army. Pierce was identified as someone to do that, and Pierce was put in charge of the 9th, 12th, and 15th infantry units hailing from New Hampshire, Vermont, North Carolina, and Ohio. Jane Pierce was distraught about the whole thing. Not only worried about her husband's safety, but again, worried that he was going to be gone for such an extended period of time. That always caused her angst. This was one case, though, where Franklin Pierce was not going to give in. His dream was to follow in his father's footsteps, lead men into battle. He was bound and determined to do it. And he said to his colleagues in New Hampshire that I will come back with honor or I will not come back at all. Maybe yes, maybe no. But that's the story for another day. That is Franklin Pierce, back to New Hampshire from the life of Franklin Pierce. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.